Hello, guys. This is Denmark one more time. This time we are talking about EEG as applied to intraoperative monitoring. We might touch here and there on the clinical aspect, and that's the general description. We're going to cover some basics of EEG, recording montages, and classification. We will also look at normal and abnormal EEG in adults, and we will touch just some fundamental principles of ECOG. So that's what we're going to do today. This is about maybe 45 minutes to an hour. Stay with us. We're going to go through this together. All right, now EEG is basically one of the oldest and commonly used IOM modalities. It is even used in anesthesia to measure the depth of anesthesia when the patient is asleep. It was considered gold standard for IOM before SCCPs were. When we're looking at the use of an application of EEG during surgery, we are looking at one main thing actually. As far as we are concerned as neurophysiologists, we are looking at assessing ischemic injuries before they happen during vascular, neurosurgical, and cardiac procedures. However, the anesthesiologists also may use EEG. We have in the USA, we have what they call the Bees monitor. That's basically an EEG strip. Anesthesia drug administration for the determination of depth of anesthesia and level of consciousness, especially as far as managing burst suppression is concerned. And our focus is going to be raw EEG. We may touch here and there on quantitative EEG, but our main focus is on the raw EEG as it comes in. What are we measuring when we're talking about EEG? Basically, we are measuring cortical function, including perfusion, oxygenation, anesthetic effects. These are all leading to how the brain potentials will be firing and how the neurons will be firing. If there's not enough perfusion, it's going to fire at a slower rate in order to protect itself. And of course, because it's not getting enough energy, enough metabolism to actually fire at the rate at which it would fire under normal conditions. Oxygenation, we're talking about, that's oxygen is a component of metabolic processes. And we also look at anesthetic effects. Drugs, of course, they are inhibiting on the cortex, so they are also going to affect the way the EEG is gonna appear. We also use EEG for the detection of seizures and other abnormal activity. Now, it is very important for us to, in order for us to speak one language, when you compare this with mathematics, you will see you have an X and a Y axis. You also may have a Z axis if you're looking at three-dimensional planes. But in this case, in order for us to speak the same language, by the way, this lecture is assuming basic knowledge of the 1020 system, even the measuring of the head and the whole 9 yards of the basics of EEG. So this is like any, those are assumptions are being made in this lecture. If you do not, you can just refer to any basic EEG text. You will be able to find out what we call the 1020 position. So this way we can speak the same language. So we also could talk about polarity and localization. And EEG, the amplifiers, they are differential amplifiers. Each channel to that amplifier is a recording of the difference in voltage between the two M inputs. And difference in voltage between two inputs show that one electrode is either more negative or more positive than the other. I can take two numbers, 2 and 5. 2 is more negative than 5, and 5 is more positive than 2. That's just a mathematical language. So when you talk about polarity, we're looking at if input of the differential amplifier is minus or negative 100 microvolts with respect to ground, and input 2 is at minus 50 microvolts with respect to the ground. The difference is 50 microvolts. So if the sensitivity or the setting on that EEG is 5 microvolts per millimeter, the amplitude of the recorded EEG deflection will be 10 millimeters, a simple division 50 over 5. By convention, EEG amplifiers are designed such that when input 1 is more negative than input 2, the deflection is upward, which is a peak polarity. And this is where we have derived how we display even SCPs and all other potentials that we have there are pretty much assuming the same polarity rule. And of course, the opposite is true. Now, the recording montage, we have two main montages that are in use, the bipolar montage and the referential montage. And the bipolar montage uses multiple electrode derivations. A derivation is a pair of electrodes linked together, basically, when you're designing that montage. No electrode is common to the input of all channels, and derivations are arranged so that the electrodes are in a straight line, or what we call an array when you speak in EEG language. And the adjacent channels have an electrode in common. Let's say, for example, you have input 1, input 2, input 3, and you might have one reference to 1 to 2, and then 2 to 3. That's you see 2 is common to these channels. And the referential montage, you have one electrode is common to the input of all channels. You might have, let's say, for example, you have one electrode at A1, which is the auricular or the earlobe, and you have an A2, which is earlobe on the right. And we can reference all the other electrodes to, on the left side to the left ear, and reference the right electrodes, right hemisphere electrodes to the right ear. Or we can have FZ, and we reference everything to FZ, and that's FZ is the one electrode that is common to the input of all channels. So the weakness that we see with this kind of montage is that the chosen referential electrode may be electrically active and introduce confusing information to all the channels. What that means is anything that's on the head is going to be affected by brain pulsations. It's going to be affected by the neuronal firing of the neurons in the brain. Therefore, you would prefer a non-cephalic reference, which in order for you to get around this. But the montage that can get around all this is the bipolar montage. And electrodes are arranged in rows of 5, viewed either from front to back, which is called the longitudinal montage, or from side to side, which is the transverse montage. And we are showing here as you go. I'm going to pick my pointer here. Going from side to side, we have the frontal polar, the frontal plane, you have the central plane, the parietal plane, the occipital pole. This is transverse, going from left to right. And here we have front to back, which is the right temporal, right parasagittal, with the sagittal and left parasagittal, and we also have the left temporal. So you see we have a longitudinal and transverse bipolar montage there. And here we're showing a 16-channel bipolar montage displaying 5 coronal planes arranged in anteroposterior order. And basically this is visible and very clear, as you can see from the figure. And in our practice, we use at least 8 channel. If EEG is one of the main modalities that we're monitoring, we use at least 8 channels. We will talk later on about some standards and some guidelines that we have here in the USA. You might have different guidelines wherever you are, but the more channels that you have, it is generally believed the more you can capture what is actually happening underneath those electrodes. And for, let's say, for example, you're doing a carotid, endarterectomy, you're looking at at least 8 channels, preferably 16, even better 21 channels. But here we have on the left side FP1 to C3, C3 to O1, FP1 to T3, T3 to O1. And on the right side FP2 to C2, C4 to O2, and FP2 to T4, and T4 to O2. In such a way that it will appear in this fashion. In this case, I've left out some of the pairs. I have left them out, but it comes to what is loosely called the double banana montage. As you can see, this is like a banana when you look at it. These central ones are being left out. And you're looking at this sideways for this is the right hemisphere and this is the left hemisphere. Right, now here, there are other montages out there that may be in use depending on the purpose. If it's for diagnostic issues, a clinical diagnostic objective that you're looking at, you see here the picture is showing a location of focus and connections of electrodes. O1 is the first electrode in the montage right here at O1, right here. This is O1. And we're going in this direction. Next one is T5, T3, F7, FP1, FP2 as you go around the circumference of for the measurement of the head. And the record is schematically shown in column labeled data, which is right here, and is interpreted as showing a left frontal focus right here. That's where the lesion is. Another montage is also a triangular montage, which we have no interest in discussing at this point. Filter settings. It is very important to be able, for every, as you understand, with filters, basically we're trying to take the noise out and leave the important stuff that we need. Given what we know about frequencies from our basic EEG, we know that we have deltas from under 4 hertz and anywhere above 4 hertz to 8 hertz. We have theta activity, and from 8 to about 13 we have alpha activity, and after anything above 13 we are looking at beta or beta activity. So your low frequency filter, you don't want it to exclude your delta, so you set it at anywhere from 0.3 to about 1 hertz. And the high frequency filter, ideally 70 hertz, but not less than 35. This setting under 35, because significant distortion and attenuation of spikes or anesthetic-induced higher frequencies can occur. And 60 cycle notch filter, it helps in some cases when you want to eliminate extraneous or noise, electrical noise, but use only as last resort in your troubleshooting, because it can also mean you're losing some of the frequencies around that 60 hertz. Display settings, your sweep speed, you want it to be around 15 millimeters per second. It allows easier recognition of wave asymmetries and voltage changes. You don't want it to be too fast, otherwise you will miss out some of the subtle changes that can take place under the electrodes. You don't want it to be too slow, otherwise if you're in the OR, you're not detecting as things are happening. But in the clinic, you could use that patient is there, but it takes you time to acquire the data that you need. So ideally 15 millimeters per second is not bad. And of course, for when we're talking about EEG as applied to the OR, intraoperative monitoring, ideally the ideal situation is you want to actually assess, because many of the patients who are coming in, let's say for example they're coming in for aneurysm clipping, or they're coming in for carotid endarterectomy. What is happening there is, many of these may have some bilateral stenosis, maybe 70% on one side and 85% on the other, and you want to have a pre-induction baseline, which you can use couple electrodes for. I know this may not be in widespread use around, around many laboratories and clinics, but the honest truth is it is necessary to do, because it is possible that the patient can stroke while going to the OR or while they're in the OR prior to induction. So you want to be able to assess where they are. At that point, you also want to document the blood pressure, the mean blood pressure, and before induction. And you want to also you capture that, and you want to take a post-induction baseline. Because why? Because the anesthetic drugs, they are also introducing their own effect on the EEG, and you want to make sure you have very little to no artifact at all in your recording. Now, let's look at patient preparation. Of course, we spoke about the electrode monitors, and you say at least 8 channels are recommended. There are some papers out there that will say 2 channels, 4 channels, but I would say personally and philosophically in our group, 8 channels are adequate, or as the minimum bare requirement. The larger the number of channels, the better, up to the 21 channels of the 1020 system. Less than 8 channels, you can only use that if you're just looking at a lateralized change or interhemispheric asymmetry as the desired information. Any electrode position changes due to surgical demarcation should be documented. There are times when the very place that you want to, you're looking at F4, for example. You're looking at T4, for example. They are doing a right frontal craniotomy, or some of these pterional approaches to tumor resections or to AVMs. You want, there's no way you can place an electrode at F4. I mean, because that's where they're working at. If they're doing a temporal resection for epilepsy, for example, you're not gonna be able to get to T4, because that's where they're gonna be working at. So that has to be documented, so that you elect your record is not is speaking the language is the same as you would want it to speak when you were in the OR. The electrode impedances, you want them to be less than 5 kilo ohms, of course. You want them to be relatively balanced. You don't want one electrode that's 4 or 5 or 10, and the other is 1 or 0.5, 0.3, because that can introduce some artifact and some wrong readings as well. This reduces risk of internal and external noise interference and distorted signals, of course. Right, now let's look at electrode types and applications that you would want to use for an EEG. There's a lot of types out there on the market. You can have metal disc or copper electrodes, gold, silver, tin. Choose one. No mixtures. You don't want to use at F4 you're using gold. At F6 you're using silver. You don't want that. If you're going to use gold, just maintain that same metal throughout the whole number of channels that you're using. Conductive gel, the 1020 conductive paste. I'm not sure what you use in your area, in your region, in your country, but here in the States, 1020 conductive paste is a popular brand that many people use. Colloidal soaked gauze to fixate the electrodes. This is when you're using copper electrodes. This allows for pre-induction baseline applications to detect any pre-existing asymmetries or interhemispheric differences. Subdermal needle electrodes can also be used in already sedated patients. Some patients come in already sedated, and you can use subdermal needle electrodes. Now, just a refresher on our frequencies. As we said, anything above 13 is beta activity, and anything between 8 and 13 is alpha, and anything between 4 and 8 is theta, and anything under 4 is delta. You might see some other texts in some other places talking about 3.5 or 7.5, and all these, but in essence, basically what we're saying is light lies in between. Anything above that is a certain frequency. And here on the picture we're looking at, here, this is beta activity, highly alert, and beta activity is usually found in the frontal and central planes of the head. High alert is seen here because I'm thinking the brain is working. This is the frontal plane is where executive decisions are made, and that's where we actually thought to be to use for thinking and for making decisions. Alpha relaxed right here. This is alpha activity, anywhere from 8 to 13 hertz right here. And theta, we're becoming a little bit drowsy, and we are at delta. We are now in deep sleep, and it's slowing down, as you can see. Anesthetic effect, you can enlarge this, and this is a helpful cheat sheet for anesthetic effects on the EEG. There's usually slowing down, and it can go into burst suppression, dose dependent. Muscle relaxants do not affect our EEG. I mean, they don't have a disadvantage, should I say, because they do, because when you have a patient on muscle relaxation, it means that removes movement artifact from your EEG, which is very good. But sometimes you want them to be able to move their eyes, and you want everything to be included together so you can get an EEG activation in place. That you can only use muscle relaxation, of course, for patients who are sedated and they are asleep, they are under anesthesia. Classification of EEG activity. Now, the goal for clinical or EEG is to make a useful diagnostic evaluation of a particular patient. Like I said, we are going to mix the two. We're going to look at EEG as applied to the OR and EEG as in the clinic. The goal of IOM EEG is to detect changes due to ischemia, and also seizure activity. Electrocorticography, ECOG, that's what we're talking about. Normal and abnormal EEG activity. There's a distinction between a normal, abnormal EEG activity and a normal or abnormal EEG record. There's a difference there. Normal EEG activity is any of the many kinds of distinctive activities that quantitatively and qualitatively speaking appear in the EEGs of larger groups who are healthy. Any EEG activity observed in healthy groups in relation to age, gender, or conscious state, asleep, awake. An abnormal EEG activity is one of the many kinds of EEG, which is basically the opposite. Do not appear in the healthy groups, but do appear in patient or sick groups. A normal EEG record shows activity within ranges expected after study of healthy groups, and does not show any activity quantitatively or qualitatively within the characteristic range of patient groups. An abnormal EEG record qualitatively and quantitatively shows activities beyond the range expected in the health groups, even though some or perhaps all of the activity in the record may be normal. Variables used in classification of EEG activity. This is critical. That's how you'll be able to describe your EEG, what you're seeing on the screen, and as you're taking your raw EEG coming in. Each variable must be considered in relation to two aspects: the subject's age and their state of consciousness. And the state refers to the subject level of responsiveness. If they may be alert, are they responsive, are they attentive, are they inattentive, are they relaxed, awake, asleep, stuporous, are they comatose? All these issues you want to description, you want to include those, that this is what the EEG shows, and this is what the age of the patient was, and this is the state in which they were when the EEG was taken. So background of any EEG pattern, the major EEG pattern, and changes in activity, that appears in the background. That is what we call the background activity. It is the setting from which the pattern can be distinguished. It's almost like wallpaper, and then you color and then you draw something on it. But it is the main activity that you can see, and then there's something that is outstanding from that main activity. That's your background. Background can represent either normal or abnormal activity, and the patterns may also be either normal or abnormal. The variables. Now let's look at the variables. Variables include frequency, voltage, and all these other issues that we'll describe in the next series of slides. Frequency refers to repetitive EEG activity and is measured in hertz. It can be rhythmic, which means it's constant frequency. It can be arrhythmic, no stable rhythms present. It can be dysrhythmic, which means rhythms or patterns rarely seen in healthy patients. That's distorted morphology. And when you're speaking about the voltage, we are looking at the average or the peak voltage. This depends in part on the recording technique. Closely spaced bipolar derivations yield lower voltages than widely spaced referential derivations. Descriptions such as low, medium, or high amplitude are subjective, and you want to try to avoid these because low, what is low, medium, what is medium, because you don't have a reference to talk about. So you want to avoid these. They are very subjective, as they depend on the display sensitivity settings that you have on the machine. Right. A couple of pictures here. The first one is showing the rhythmic, the first one is showing rhythmic activity, and the one below is showing, we're looking at the top, we have rhythmic beta activity, and the bottom, we're looking at arrhythmic activity. This picture shows hypersynchrony, and this arrow here shows that synchrony right there. Voltage, there are related terms that come with the voltage. How to qualify the voltage? Is it attenuated, which means is there suppression or depression of the activity? That means a reduction in amplitude due to decreased voltage. In hypersynchrony, we're looking at an increase in voltage and regularity of rhythmic activity, often within the alpha, beta, or theta range. In paroxysmal, we're looking at activity that emerges from background in a rapid onset, reaching quite high voltages, and then ending with an abrupt return to the lower voltage activity. Morphology. Morphology, we're looking at the shape of the waveform. Shape of the waveform determined by the frequencies that combine to make up that waveform. Their phase, their voltage relationships, and the terms that are related to morphology. You can have monomorphic, which means distinct EEG activity composed of one dominant frequency, and sinusoidal, like a sine wave, waves resembling sine waves. Monomorphic activity is usually sinusoidal, but not always. Transient, an isolated wave or pattern that is distinctly different from background activity, such as a spike or sharp wave. Complex, a sequence of two or more waves, not necessarily of the same frequency, with distinct form or pattern different from the background activity, such as you could have a spiking wave complex. Biphasic, diphasic, in some languages, especially probably in England or someplace, you might have, instead of biphasic, you might have diphasic. It's a wave or complex having two distinct components, one surface positive and the other surface negative. Triphasic, three distinct components, negative, positive, negative, positive, or you can have a positive, negative, positive. The quantity is the amount of a particular EEG activity with respect to the percentage time present and or to the voltage. The term abundance is sometimes used to express amount of EEG activity. Related terms that go with quantity is continuous, occurring without interruption. Discontinuous, which means it's intermittent. Regular usually refers to regular frequency. Irregular, that means it's got irregular frequency. Variables. as we continue the variables, we're looking at the location. EEG, you have to describe it in voltage and all these other variables that we're talking about, the intensity, but we also look at surface positive, surface negative, but we also look at where is it, where is that alpha activity, where is that beta activity, where is that theta activity. This is the scope distribution of the EEG rhythms or patterns. And the terms related to that can be generalized, which means it's not limited to a specific area. It can be lateralized, which means it's coming only from one hemisphere or one side. It's bilateral, it's coming from both sides. It's focal, that means it's localized to an area. And you also want to describe the symmetry. Is there equal distribution of this EEG activity over homologous head areas? EEG alpha activity is seen symmetrically in the left and right occipital areas. You want to look at the same areas on both hemispheres. If you're going to look at the frontal plane in one hemisphere, you want to make a comparison with what is happening in the frontal plane on the right hemisphere. Synchrony. We're looking at the simultaneous appearance of rhythmic or morphologically distinct patterns over the regions of the head, either unilaterally or bilaterally. Periodicity, we're looking at the appearance of EEG activity at more or less regular intervals. It may be generalized, it may be focal, it may be lateralized. Reactivity, we are looking at the reaction of the EEG to stimulation or to a stimulus-related change in morphology. Right, now let's look at the types of EEG activities. And they depend on age, they depend on state of consciousness. These are two things. Adults show a little variability from person to person in both sleeping and waking states. EEG of children shows systematic age-related changes both awake and asleep. Normal EEG activity in the awake adults. You have alpha activity, ages 20 to 60. The state of relaxed, eyes closed, location, occipital, in parietal regions, you might see that. Attenuated visual stimulation, opening eyes, increased vigilance or attentiveness, usually rhythmic and sometimes referred to as sinusoidal. That's from 8 to 13 hertz. 66% of the average alpha voltage falls between 20 microvolts and 60 microvolts. So here we are seeing this picture. In this picture, we're seeing a 35-year-old with bilaterally synchronous alpha activity elicited by eye closure. Bilaterally synchronous alpha activity elicited by eye closure. That's what we see there. The normal EEG activity in awake adults. Now we're looking at the beta activity. If the frequency is over 13 or higher than 13, the voltage is less than 20 microvolts, and the main location is the frontal and central regions. And three types of beta activity we see based on distributions in reactivity. We see a generalized, usually bilaterally synchronous. We see a precentral and a posterior beta activity, commonly seen in the frontal and central regions, like we said, and amount of voltage is enhanced by barbiturates. We see here, this is generalized beta activity in a 35-year-old with a filter setting of 70 for the high frequency filter and 1 for low frequency filter. As you can see, these are all high frequency potentials that we see there. Right, now theta activity, of course, is between 4 and 8 hertz, and location in normal working adults. A small amount may be found in the central, temporal, parietal areas. It is rarely rhythmic, may be more prominent on the left than on the right. That's an example there of temporal theta activity in a 56-year-old awake woman. There's also another, rhythm called the mu rhythm. It's morphologically and topographically distinct activity that is seen in the central areas. Frequency is about 9 hertz, and if you want to give it a range, you find it between 7 to 11 hertz, and it is distinguished from alpha by its distribution, also by its unique reactivity. Typically, it is stopped or it can be blocked out or wiped out by movements such as fist clenching. If the patient or the subject clenches their fist, the mu rhythm disappears. Even imagining a movement for the subject, just imagining a movement, that mu rhythm disappears. And even tactile movement can also block that mu rhythm. It has a defining, distinctive arch-like morphology. When mu activity is seen in EG, it should be verified by testing its reactivity, blocking with movement of the opposite side of the body. That's how you can actually say, hey, you know what, this is mu rhythm. Otherwise, it may fall into the same range as alpha. Now, let's look at where so far we've been talking about adults that are awake. Now let's look at the sleeping adults. And in this case, then we go into the stages of sleep. This is a subset of, EEG called polysomnography, where you're studying sleep studies. They are actually surgeon doctors here in America, and I know probably wherever you are, there are some sleep doctors as well, because sleep is a health issue. Now, stage one sleep, our subject is getting drowsy. There's a transition from wakefulness to true sleep. It is first typified by a decrease in voltage of the alpha rhythm. If the subject is poor to no alpha activity, to begin with, the earliest sign may be appearance of diffusely scattered theta activity. Here we see a stage one sleep, decrease in voltage of alpha rhythm during drowsiness, with alpha activity disappearing and reappearing. As you can see here, appearing, disappearing, reappearing. Stage 2 sleep. As sleep deepens, the next distinct change involves the appearance of a new 11 to 15 hertz rhythm, typically 14, and it has a predominant central vertex distribution, about CZ, around that area. It appears in spindle-like bursts of rhythmic waves, which first increase then decrease in voltage. These are called sleep spindles. Theta activity increases in amounts than you see in stage one. You may start to see K complexes as well, which are sharp, slow waves with associated spindle burst. They start to appear midline, centrally, and typically bilaterally, and very symmetrical. Stage 2 sleep, we see here an appearance of 14 Hz central vertex rhythmic activity and vertex sharp waves. Stage 3 sleep, delta activity less than 2 Hz starts to appear. And sleep spindles may persist but reduced in quantity. The K complexes also persist. Now we see here, this is a pictorial representation of an example of stage 3 sleep, presence of 2 Hz frontally predominant transients with occasional bursts of 12 to 14 spindles. Delta activity is present more than 50% of the time in stage 4 sleep. That's not what we're talking about now. The slow activity is typically maximal over the frontal areas. And an example in a picture there, this is showing anteriorly predominant delta activity present more than 50% of the time in voltage greater than 75 microvolts. Now, further than that, stage 4, you start going into rapid eye movement sleep, and it appears and is observed in the electrooculogram, which means you have electrodes by the orbicularis oculi in addition to your EEG, and you put that in the same panel. You can see that decrease. You start to see decrease in muscle tone on the EMG, and the sharp theta waves, which are called sawtooth waves, may appear in the central areas. Rapid eye movement sleep typically recurs at about every 90 minutes. Now let's look at abnormal EEG activity in adults. Criteria for abnormality: you're looking at frequencies, you're looking at voltages, the locations, the loss of reactivity. There are certain expectations. Up to now, we've spoken about what happens in a normal, healthy adult with their frequencies for certain locations of the electrode and on which hemisphere. And if there is any stimulation, what happens? Now, if what is expected is not seen, then we know there's an abnormality. Now, this is assuming that technically we are sound. We have placed everything that way it's supposed to go. So the frequencies of basic rhythms are faster or slower than established in healthy groups of the same age and state. The voltage of a particular EEG activity is either higher or lower than the observed limits in healthy subjects of the same age and state. It may be continuous, intermittent, or paroxysmal. The locations of various EEG activities are different from those in the control or the health groups. The waveforms or patterns appear that have a morphology different than those encountered in the control group, same age and state. Distinct elements with a periodic character, unusual for age and state, they appear. And after stimulation, what do you expect to find? You don't find. That's loss of reactivity to stimulation. That's ground for abnormality. And when there's abnormality, there are certain traits that you can see, or characteristics that you see. Spikes, sharp waves, spike in wave complex, like 3 Hz spike in wave, slow variant, fast variant. You can also see sharp and slow wave complex, rhythmic, hypersynchronous activity, periodic discharges, for example, periodic lateralized epileptiform discharges, or they're called PLEDs. These are sharp and slow discharges. Periodic slow complexes, burst suppression activity, triphasic waves, alpha coma, spindle coma. These are characteristics of abnormal EEG. As we continue with, in this slide, abnormal sleep patterns. You start to see things that you're not supposed to see in stage 1 of sleep. That's abnormality. Or another stage, or things just mingled together that you don't expect to see in a stage 4 sleep, in a stage 3, in REM sleep, all kinds of things. Excessively slow activity, theta and delta activity. Intermittent, continuous, focal or asymmetrical, non-focal. Excessively fast activity, 13 to 30 Hz or more. Intermittent, continuous, focal or asymmetrical. Excessively high voltage activity, electrocerebral inactivity or silence. That's an abnormal characteristic. Now, we cannot, the EEG is a wide field. There are a lot of things to talk about. You will see that we did not talk about the EEG in pediatrics and also the geriatric population, which is above 60, and children below 20. Because the population that we usually are dealing with as far as EEG is concerned are usually between 20 to 60. So we just looked at the main population, at least for our group, and I believe it may be for your group as well. But Now we move on to ECOG. Now ECOG is usually used to when there's intractable seizures or uh, epilepsy, and there's a surgery that has to be done to take away part of the temporal lobe. Our job as neurophysiologists is to go in there and help the surgeon demarcate functional brain, as well as find out exactly where those the area that is causing the seizures is coming from, and the demarcations, so we can take out what needs to be taken out and leave what needs to be left in there. So intraoperative hippocampal ECOG allows sparing of functionally important hippocampus, thus minimizing postoperative memory decline. It also helps in the removal of developmental malformations of the brain, and most importantly, the excision of highly epileptogenic cortical dysplasias. Demonstration of a structural lesion in the MRI does not prove that it is the cause of epilepsy. Additional EEG evidence is required to establish that the lesion is in fact responsible for the patient's seizures. The boundaries for the epilepsy, for the area that is causing the epilepsy, need to be established before surgery. They are difficult to delineate, however, because they may be found in and around the margin of or remote from the lesion. The scalp EEG is useful, but it's not precise enough. Subdural ECOG offers greater precision to guide surgical resection of both the lesion and the zone that is causing the epilepsy. The area of inner ictal, an ictal moment just means the beginning of a seizure and the end of it. So the area of inner ictal spiking, or the interactive zone, is often wider than the ictal zone, the onset zone, where the seizure originates. So ECOG is used to localize the irritative zone, to map out cortical functions, to predict the success of surgery for epilepsy. The advantages of ECOG: it offers flexible placement of recording and STEM electrodes. The recordings can be performed before and after each resection to assess the presence or absence of epileptiform activity. It allows direct electrical stimulation of the brain so that functional cortex, e.g. speech, is preserved. However, it has its own challenges, like everything else that we do in the OR as neurophysiologists. We only take it for a limited time, so it is a limited sampling time, and that compounds into the second disadvantage, or the challenge, is that spontaneous discharges consist exclusively of inner ictal spikes and shock waves, and seizures are rarely recorded due to that short duration of the test, or intermittent test that we're taking. It is impossible to distinguish primary epileptiform discharges from secondary propagated discharges arising from at a distant site. Both the background activity and the activity that and the epileptiform discharge or activity can be altered by anesthetic or by narcotic analgesics, and even the surgery itself. And we can also, something that is interesting as well when we are doing ECOG, is that we can do phase reversal. That way we can distinguish what is motor, what is sensory. We spoke about this, is just a repetition. We spoke about that earlier on. That way, when the resection is being done, we don't take out what is motor, we don't take out what is sensory. We take out just enough of that area that is causing the active zone that is causing the epilepsy. We also don't want to take the speech areas. So that's about it from me. Any questions? You can shoot us an email, myself or Murat. All right. Thank you so much.